We are less than 2 months out from New York City's highly anticipated mayoral primary. And with a global pandemic, it's perhaps no surprise what the biggest issue is for New Yorkers. According to a recent poll by Spectrum News and Ipsos, more than half of likely Democratic voters say COVID-19 is the biggest problem facing the city. Crime or violence is second with 39%, followed by affordable housing and racial injustice. When asked which candidate would best handle crime and public safety, 17% of likely Democratic voters said Andrew Yang and Eric Adams would each do the best job. For more, let's bring in Eric Adams. He is running for New York City's mayor as a Democrat. He is also the Brooklyn Borough President and a former NYPD captain. Mr. Adams, welcome. It's great to have you with us. I'm afraid I can't hear you. I don't know if that's a problem on my end. Oh, yes. Now I can hear you. Great.
It's good to be here with you.
And we're delighted. You know, listening to those poll numbers, it's really no surprise that ending this pandemic is a top issue for the majority of New Yorkers. But as we saw there, crime and violence is also a seminal concern. According to the NYPD, New York City saw a 97% jump in shooting incidents and a 44% increase in murders in 2020. Those are pretty significant numbers. So you, with your background, have positioned yourself as the public safety candidate. What is your plan to bring crime down in the 5 boroughs?
And really, COVID recovery is attached to public safety. Public safety is the prerequisite to prosperity. And we have to deal with gun violence and the gang crises that we are experiencing here in our city. Much of the violence that you're seeing is generated by gang and rival crews. And my role as the mayor is to ensure that we stop the flow of guns in our city and address the gang members that are carrying out this form of illegal behavior.
So while we're on the topic of law enforcement, I also want to ask you about police reform in America, because as you are aware, there's a bipartisan group of senators led by North Carolina Republican Tim Scott and New Jersey Democrat Cory Booker working on an all-encompassing reform bill. And one of the biggest sticking points right now is qualified immunity for officers accused of excessive force. So as someone with an extensive law enforcement background, what is your view of qualified immunity?
It's imperative to remove qualified immunity, particularly with officers who recklessly disregard the role that they are carrying out. But we should do it in a manner that we do not go after officers who are carrying out lawful actions, and in the course of carrying out those actions, someone is injured or harmed. We must have a fair system, and I believe that as the senators look at this bill, they should speak to those who have spent their lives fighting for reform. There are great organizations out there like Noble, National Black Police Association, and others who can give them good input to make sure that this bill does not become harmful, but it remains helpful.
And so, sticking with your law enforcement background, how would you persuade, those Democratic voters who are not feeling as if the police in general are often on their side? How would you persuade those voters that your history as a police officer will not interfere with your willingness to bring about real police reform?
Well, people talk about the role I played as a police officer, but I was recruited to go into the police department by civil rights leaders. I was arrested and I was assaulted badly by police officers. And I was encouraged after that to go in and fight for reform inside. And it's the combination that I bring of looking at reform and justice, but safety. We saw an incident in Park Slope, Brooklyn, 2 days ago, where a 52-year-old mother was shot point-blank range by her ex-lover. And it doesn't make any consolation if a police officer shoots someone illegally or if a gangbanger in blue jeans. No matter what community I am in, people want their families to be safe. And that resonates with everyday New Yorkers and I know my message will resonate with them.
And let me just ask you about the Derek Chauvin verdict. Obviously, this is setting a major legal precedent going forward. Do you believe in this case the jury got it right? Were they justified in finding Chauvin guilty on all 3 charges?
Yes, I do. And I did not join marches. I traveled with my son. I took him to the 103rd precinct where Sean Bell was shot and where I was assaulted as a 15-year-old. I took him to Wheeler Avenue where Diallo was shot at 44 times. I took him over to the 70th precinct where Abner Louima was sodomized, and to the Bronx where we saw a woman shot during an eviction almost 30 years ago, because this jury broke ranks with what we saw historically. Instead of guilty, 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 far too often we saw not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. And I wanted him to understand the history of this fight for justice and reform. We must not go backwards. We have to keep our city safe, but we also must have proper policing and redefine the term of policing in our country.
And pivoting to the economy, as you know, New York City, like so many American cities, has taken a huge hit due to the pandemic. What is your plan for reinvigorating New York City's economy and creating more jobs?
And that's a great question because it goes together. We must be safe. If we're not safe in the city, companies are not coming to New York. Our multi-billion-dollar tourism industry is not going to return if tourists are shot at Grand Central Station. And so the first order of business is to get violence under control. Second, get COVID under control by coming up with clear regulations on how to get our offices open so we can start that economic ecosystem of tourism. 75% of our hotel occupancies deals with those business travelers. So we need to get workers back into the offices. Our Broadway must get back in operating. And then we need to be smart with the $10 billion that we are going to receive from the federal government. We must spend those dollars to deal with the historical inequities that we have witnessed in this city and just become a smarter city in the process.
And Eric, before we let you go, would you like to respond to the Politico review that pointed out that there may have been some funds in your charity and some municipal funds that you spent for self-promotion that may not have been entirely above board? Would you like to respond to that criticism?
It is so silly. That article has been written so many times, so many different ways. In New York City, we have what's called a conflict of interest board. I'm the only elected official in the country that has a policy person that looks at compliance, and a 4-person team. Every governmental oversight agency stated Eric Adams did nothing wrong. He followed the rules. He followed the laws. That was just creative journalism. It's part of the political season right now. I raised several millions to give back to nonprofits, charities. These nonprofits in the inner city, they don't have endowments. They don't have multi-million-dollar gifts that are handed down to them. They need help from government. And I'm so proud of what we have done. Now, $1 went to salaries. Now, $1 went to something fancy. It went right back to people. And so the role of Borough President, I'm pleased at what I have done. And this is the political season. So you're going to get critiques like that. But we followed every rule, and every governmental oversight has stated that over and over again. But, you know, there's something called creative journalism.
Well, Eric Adams, New York City mayoral candidate, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Take care.